He laughed in front of our friends and said, "She doesn't even have a job. She just shops and decorates." Everyone chuckled, including the men I signed checks for every single month. He didn't know the truth. I own the company. And 2 weeks later, I walked into the office with my lawyer and HR director. And I fired him and his entire boys' club. One by one. My name is Sienna Cruz. I'm 34 years old. And if you ask my husband, I'm just a pretty little housewife with too many shoes. What he doesn't know is that I inherited my father's construction supply firm 3 years ago. I stepped in after his stroke, learned every inch of the business, and quietly turned it into a multi-million-dollar operation. But I never made a show of it. I didn't need to. My husband, Derek, works in project management at a firm we contract regularly. What he also doesn't know, half the guys in his office, his lunch buddies, his network, are technically my employees under shell corporations I helped fund. For a while, I let the ego games slide. Until the night he humiliated me at a party. In front of his friends. Mocked me for not doing anything meaningful. As they all laughed, men who worked for me and had no clue who signed their bonuses. That was the moment I decided. Let the boys play. I'll write the final act. There's something magical about the early years of love. The way the sunlight hits your bedroom window differently when someone else's breath is tangled with yours on the pillow. The way you save the last bite of cake, not because you're full but because he loves chocolate. The way your heart flips when he texts you out of the blue, just to say, "Thinking about you." That was Derek and me. At least, that's what I thought we were. He was everything I dreamed about in my 20s. Tall, strong jawline, that cocky but warm smile that turned strangers into instant friends. He was 5 years older than me and always had this air of competence that made me feel safe. When we first met, I was grieving. My father had just passed unexpectedly from a stroke, and I'd come back home from New York where I was working in a boutique design firm. I was planning to stay only a few months, handle the estate, help my mom, make peace with the unfinished chapters he left behind. Instead, I met Derek. He was charming in that effortless Southern California way, always tan, always laughing, always knowing someone who knew someone. He met me at a charity gala organized for my father's foundation. I wore a black satin dress I didn't feel like I deserved. He was in a gray suit, glass of bourbon in hand. "You look like grief dressed up as hope," he said. It should have been a red flag, too poetic, too performative. But I was too hollow to care. I smiled anyway. We talked for 3 hours that night. About life, parents, loss, beginnings. I didn't even notice when the waitstaff started clearing tables. It felt like maybe the universe was finally throwing me a bone. Something soft to land on. A year later, we were married in Big Sur, surrounded by lavender cliffs and waves. He promised to love me in storms and sun. He told everyone I was his rock, his miracle, his anchor. And for a while, I believed I was. The first time I saw his friends tease him about being the guy married to the heiress, I laughed it off. It was at a barbecue. They clapped him on the back like he'd won the lottery. "Must be nice," one of them said, grinning. "No stress, no student loans, just free brunches and a woman who can afford every renovation." Derek chuckled. "Hey, I made my own way. She's just the cherry on top." I felt the sting but said nothing. I'd grown up with wealth, yes. But I worked. Always had. I paid my own rent in New York. Took unpaid internships. Built my portfolio from scratch. When my father passed, he left me the majority shares of Cruz Industrial Supply, a company with contracts spanning city infrastructure, hospitals, and private construction. I didn't know a thing about concrete mix or drywall bids when I inherited it, but I didn't sell. I studied, shadowed, asked questions most men scoffed at. And when I stepped into the CEO role quietly, I restructured everything from procurement to internal HR. Within 18 months, I turned a stagnating family business into a rising industry leader. I never told Derek, not because I wanted to deceive him, but because he never asked. He just assumed I lived on inherited wealth and dabbled in design. I let him believe it. I thought maybe he needed that. We lived in a glassy modern home in Laguna Hills. He had a closet filled with crisp shirts and polished Oxfords. I filled our kitchen with fresh tulips every Monday. On the outside, we were the golden couple. He'd come home from the office and wrap his arms around me from behind as I cooked. "Smells amazing, mi reina," he'd say, kissing my neck. I'd lean into him, close my eyes. This is happiness, I'd think. Simple.
Steady. Real.
But things shifted slowly. He started working late more often.
Stopped asking me about my day.
When I told him I was heading out of town for meetings, he'd barely nod. Once, I returned from a 4-day trade show in Chicago, and he didn't even ask how it went. "You get that housewife glow when you travel," he said, grinning as he scrolled on his phone. I laughed, awkward. It wasn't a vacation, Derek. I closed 2 contracts. One with a citywide development firm. He glanced up briefly.
Nice.
"What were you wearing when you pitched?" I stared.
He winked.
I laughed it off again. "Because what else do you do with a man you love, who's started confusing your worth with what you wear?" Our 3rd anniversary fell on a Wednesday. I booked us a private table at a cliffside restaurant. It overlooked the ocean, lit with soft lanterns and a string quartet that played 90s R&B in a way that was oddly perfect. I wore red. He wore indifference. He complimented the wine more than me. And when I handed him a watch I had custom engraved with the coordinates of where we first kissed, he smiled, then said, "I should have gotten you something. I've just been slammed." I brushed it off.
"Don't worry," I said.
"You showing up is enough." He leaned back, smirking.
"See?
That's why I love you. So low maintenance." And for a moment, I felt like a cactus on display in a flower shop.
Pretty.
Undemanding. Disposable. 2 weeks later, we attended his friend Gino's birthday at a rooftop bar in LA. Derek was in rare form. Charming, funny, laughing too loud. The drinks flowed, the circle tightened. And then someone made a joke about women spending money, like it's Monopoly cash. Derek raised his glass and said, "Tell me about it. Sienna hasn't worked a day since we met. But hey, at least the house looks nice, right?" Everyone laughed. I stared at him. "I do work, Derek," I said quietly. He waved me off. Sure, Pinterest and wine. You've got the hardest job in the world." More laughter. Even Gino's girlfriend glanced at me, mortified. My hands went cold. I excused myself to the restroom and stayed there for 10 minutes, staring at my reflection. When I came back, no one noticed. Except one person. Jake, a man who used to work under our cruise supply chain division. He had no idea I was CEO. He pulled me aside, hesitating. "Hey, I hope I'm not overstepping, but the way Derek talked about you back there, that wasn't okay." I swallowed hard. "Thank you." He looked sheepish.
He's always been that way.
Likes to be the star. I nodded, but something twisted in me. Not pain. Not even rage.
Clarity.
Derek didn't just want a partner. He wanted a prop. A polished woman with money, a good smile, and no substance he had to reckon with. But the joke was on him. Because I owned the company that paid his friends' salaries. And for the first time in our marriage, I realized he didn't deserve to sit at the table I built. That night, as he snored softly beside me, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. No more shrinking. No more silence. The next time he laughed at me, I'd let him finish. Then I'd make the call. The one that would turn his entire job and his little boys' club into a cautionary tale. And I'd do it the way women like me do everything.
Clean.
Controlled. Final. There's a kind of power that doesn't need to be announced. It doesn't come with a badge or a nameplate. It doesn't scream across boardrooms or brag over cocktails. It moves quietly, behind the curtain, with grace sharper than steel. That was the power I held. And Derek had no idea. After the rooftop humiliation, I didn't confront him.
Not yet.
Because rage, while satisfying, rarely rewrites systems. And this wasn't just about a man who mocked me. It was about a culture, the one he and his friends upheld, where women were either muses or managers, never leaders, where their names were on the blueprints, but mine was on the deeds. I'd spent 3 years rebuilding Crew's industrial supply from the inside out. When my father died, most of his staff assumed I'd sell. Some even offered to relieve me of the burden. But I was never the woman they expected. Instead, I walked into the headquarters in a pencil skirt and heels and asked for every invoice from the last 2 years. Then I hired Rosa, sharp-tongued, Harvard MBA, daughter of a welder from East LA. She became my COO, my wall, my sword. Together, we cut 18% of waste, renegotiated our supplier contracts, and set up silent partnerships with firms that needed insulation from male-dominated vendor bias, including Derek's.
Yes.
His company, Benson and Taylor, was one of our newer clients. They didn't know Cruz had taken a majority stake in DF Solutions, a subsidiary we used for logistics outsourcing. And guess who handled those logistics?
Derek.
Gino.
Caleb.
The very men who laughed over whiskey while calling me unemployed. I didn't just hold the keys to their paychecks. I wrote the checks. And I was about to write their exit. But before I did anything official, I needed to be sure. Not of my decision, I was certain, but of the timing. Because like any good demolition, the teardown only works if it happens all at once. So I started quietly. I reviewed DF Solutions performance reports for the past 12 months. Sloppy deadlines, billing discrepancies, internal complaints from female staff, and most damning, unauthorized subcontracts signed off by Derek and Gino. I highlighted everything, then looped in Rosa. Her response? Finally, I've been waiting to swing the axe. We brought in legal and HR under NDA, set up meetings, mapped out severance packages and PR buffers, and then we set a date. Friday, 2 weeks out. A clean sweep. Meanwhile, at home, Derek acted like nothing had changed. He kissed me on the forehead, asked if we could upgrade the SUV. Even joked one night, "You're so lucky I take care of all the hard stuff." I smiled sweetly. "You have no idea how lucky I am." He grinned, oblivious. I started calling it Operation Glass Castle, because that's what he'd built. A kingdom of mirrors and swagger, destined to shatter the second someone touched it. In those 2 weeks, I crafted a script. Not for the meeting.
For me.
Because no matter how composed I felt, there was still a part of me, buried deep beneath the precision and planning, that remembered the man who once held my hand at my father's grave, who brought me hot tea during migraines, who picked tulips from the garden and left them on my desk. I had to grieve that version, even if he'd never existed outside my hopes. So every night, after he fell asleep, I wrote letters I never intended to send. One read, "You loved the version of me who didn't outshine you, and I shrunk so often I forgot I could take up space." Another, "I wasn't quiet because I was empty. I was quiet because I was building." I folded them all, tied them with a ribbon, and put them in a box labeled "Proof I Survived." The night before the firings, I made dinner. Derek was glowing. "We just landed a new material supplier," he said proudly. "Might get promoted soon." I smiled.
Oh.
He nodded.
Yeah.
Gino and I pitched it together. Caleb set it up. "What's the supplier's name?"
I asked.
He grinned. "Something like DF, DS, whatever. Doesn't matter. They're solid." I sipped my wine slowly. It was us. Our company. Our test run. And he didn't even know it. I stood up. "Dessert?" He leaned back. "Always. You spoil me." I walked to the fridge, voice soft. "Tomorrow's going to be memorable." He chuckled. "Why's that?" I turned, smiling over my shoulder. "No reason." The next morning, he left early for work. Pressed shirt. Fresh shave. Texted me mid-drive. "Love you, Mirena. Big day ahead." He wasn't wrong. At 10 a.m., Rosa and I walked into the DF Solutions office with our legal counsel and HR lead. I wore all black. Hair pulled back. Expression neutral. We called Derek in first. He looked surprised when he saw me. "Babe, what are you doing here?" "Sit down, Derek." Rosa handed him a file. He frowned. "What is this?" Termination documents, I said evenly. He laughed. Very funny. I didn't blink. He opened the file. His face changed. What the hell is this? He asked, voice tight. Your exit, I said. Effective immediately. He looked up, panic forming. Wait, what's going on? I work for Benson and… No, Rosa interrupted. You work through Benson. But your contracts were managed by DF Solutions, which we own, which I run, and which your wife owns outright. He looked at me, stunned. You're the owner? I smiled.
CEO.
Majority shareholder. Also the woman you humiliated in front of your colleagues last month. He tried to laugh it off. This is personal. No, I said. This is professional. But it's very convenient when the personal and professional align. We brought in Gino next. Then Caleb. One by one. Each stunned. Each unaware. Each escorted out with dignity. We didn't know them. By 1 p.m. it was done. The glass castle had fallen. And I didn't break a sweat. That evening I went home. Derek's keys had already been deactivated. His access code revoked. His things packed neatly in boxes and delivered to his brother's house.
He called.
I let it go to voicemail, then listened as his voice cracked. Sienna, I didn't know. You never told me. I didn't think. I didn't mean to. Can we just talk? I deleted it. Because talking is for equals. And Derek had made it clear. He didn't see me as one.
So now?
He could speak to my silence. You'd think the worst part of burning a bridge would be the smoke. But it's not. It's the silence afterward. The way people stare from the other side, squinting into the ash, wondering if you're real. Wondering if the girl they mocked could really light the match and walk away without flinching. Let me tell you something. I didn't just walk away. I built a cathedral in the space they left behind. The day after I fired Derek and his friends, the gossip started like wildfire. At first, quiet. A few emails. Some panicked calls to HR from Benson and Taylor executives. Is this true? Derek was terminated? Gino too. Did you know she was the owner? She never said anything. She acted like a housewife.
Exactly.
That was the play. I didn't hide behind silence. I used it. Because the moment people think you're harmless, they stop watching your hands. And mine? Had been moving pawns across a board they didn't even know existed. Derek showed up at our house 2 days later. The doorbell rang at 7:42 p.m. I already knew it was him. He'd been texting nonstop, everything from guilt to rage to begging. I opened the door slowly. There he was.
Disheveled.
Eyes red. Wearing the same sweatshirt he wore the night we moved in together. Please, he said. Just talk to me. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, arms crossed. Talk. He blinked. You fired me. Yes. You made me look like a fool. No, I corrected. You did that all by yourself. He shifted on his feet. Why didn't you tell me you owned Cruise? That you were CEO? I tilted my head. You never asked. Not once. You just assumed I lived off my inheritance and decorated the house. That's not fair. I cut him off. You called me unemployed. In front of your colleagues. You let them laugh at me. I didn't mean it like that. No, I said, voice calm. You meant it exactly like that. Because you needed to feel like the man. And to you, that meant making sure I never outshined you. So you dimmed me.
Daily. Softly.
Jokingly. Until you believed your own illusion. He was silent. You never loved the real me, I said. Only the version who made you feel powerful. He swallowed. I didn't know you had this in you. I stepped closer. That's the thing, Derek. I always had it in me. You were just too busy looking in the mirror to see the fire behind you. Then I walked back inside, closed the door, and locked it. That night, I opened a fresh notebook. Title: Phase 2, Reclaiming My Name. Because firing Derek was just the beginning. Now came the rebuilding. Not just of my company, but of me. First, I rebranded. Cruise Industrial Supply had always been seen as my father's legacy. It was time it became mine. I shortened the name to CS Group. Modern.
Sleek. Bold.
We redesigned the logo, restructured the leadership board, and launched a full-scale PR campaign. New vision. Same foundation. A woman at the helm. Industry outlets picked it up. We were featured in Forbes Women, Fast Company, and a construction equity magazine called Steel and Grit. Headlines like, "The quiet CEO who rebuilt a powerhouse from the inside out. She fired her husband, then tripled revenue. Don't call her a housewife. Sienna Cruz's empire is built on concrete and fire." Meanwhile, Rosa handled internal morale with surgical grace. We held a town hall. She opened with, "If you ever underestimated the woman who signs your paychecks, consider this your education." Everyone laughed. The staff, especially the women, were emboldened. Some even wore shirts that said, "I work for her." Morale soared. Productivity followed. And contracts? They flooded in. Turns out, clients love a woman who doesn't flinch when cutting ties. 1 week later, I got a call from Derek's brother, Marco. "Hey, just checking in," he said gently. "He's not doing great." "I'm not his nurse, Marco." "I know. But for what it's worth, you did the right thing." "We always knew he had a blind spot when it came to you." I think it scared him. "What?" "How brilliant you are." I paused, then thanked him. Because sometimes hearing it from someone other than yourself is the thing that turns belief into truth. I started going into the office more often. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to be seen. Let them whisper. Let them say, "She's the one who fired her husband." Because every time they said it, they confirmed, I was no longer a woman behind the curtain. I was center stage, running the show. At night, I took long walks on the beach. Alone. No Derek. No masks. Just me, the wind, and the sound of waves that reminded me. Even the ocean crashes loudly. And still returns. Stronger each time. I didn't cry for him anymore. I cried for me. For every dinner party where I stayed quiet. Every idea I dismissed because he thought it was cute. Every compliment I gave to a man who thought praise was a form of submission. I cried because the woman I am now would have scared the girl I used to be. And that's okay. She was tender, hopeful, beautiful in her softness. But the woman I am now, she's forged, not to survive a man, but to never need one again. When you leave a man who thought your silence was devotion, you start to redefine every word you once believed in.
Love.
Respect. Success.
Power.
You relearn them on your own terms.
From scratch.
Like language after amnesia. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you discover someone who speaks that new language without ever needing translation. I met him in the most unexpected way. His name was Julian. He ran a small, eco-forward development firm based in San Diego. We'd crossed paths once at a sustainability conference years ago, back when I was still in the background, taking notes for my father.
He remembered me.
I didn't remember him until we ended up on the same panel about women-led industrial innovation. I wore a navy blue blazer and calm lipstick. He wore rolled sleeves and scuffed brown shoes. I thought, not my type. Until he spoke. Until he listened. Until after the panel he came up to me with eyes that didn't scan my body or my name tag, but held me. "I always wondered when the daughter would become the storm," he said, smiling softly. "Now I see it happened." I blinked. "Do you always speak in metaphors?" "Only to people who are in them." We had coffee that week. Nothing romantic. Just a long table between us, 2 cappuccinos, and an ease I hadn't felt in years. He asked me about my company. Not as a test. Not to be impressed. He just wanted to know. When I mentioned Derek, briefly, vaguely, he didn't prod. He simply said, "Sometimes, fire makes space for better architecture." I smiled for the first time in weeks. A real smile. One that started in my chest. I didn't jump into anything. Didn't rush. Didn't let flattery override caution. But I found myself texting him. About contracts.
About books.
About bad sushi in hotel bars. He replied with patience. Never urgency. Never expectation. Just presence. And one night, as I sat curled on the couch watching the sunset reflect off my kitchen tiles, he texted, "You're not intimidating. You're just finally occupying all the space you were always meant to." I put the phone down and cried. Not because I was sad, but because, for the first time in a long time, I felt seen without being dissected. Meanwhile, Derek's spiral continued. He tried suing me for wrongful termination. Our legal team left. He filed for unemployment. It was denied. Then he did something predictable.
He tried to smear me online.
An anonymous post appeared on a local business forum. Female exec fired her own husband in an act of revenge. Dangerous narcissist hiding behind feminism. It didn't go viral. It got dismantled. Within 2 hours, employees from CS and vendors posted under it. "She's the reason I stayed in this industry. This woman saved my career. No one works harder than her. No one listens deeper." The thread got locked. Derek never posted again. But I could feel his anger through the silence. Like smoke from a fire he couldn't control. One evening, I met Julian for dinner. A real date this time. He wore navy. I wore a dress I used to think was too bold. He didn't try to impress me. He asked about my favorite books. My childhood dreams. The first time I ever felt powerful. Over dessert, he leaned in. "What would your younger self think of you now?" I smiled. "She'd be terrified." He tilted his head. "But proud." I nodded slowly.
Yes.
"I think she'd be proud." That night, as we walked to our cars, he stopped me. "Can I say something?" "Of course." "I'm not here to fix anything. Or protect you. You've already done both. But I'd like to walk beside you, wherever that leads." I didn't answer. I just reached for his hand. And for the first time since my marriage imploded, I didn't feel like I was bracing for betrayal. I felt still, like the storm had passed. Back at work, Rosa knocked on my office door one morning. She was grinning. "Guess who just emailed for a vendor pitch?" I looked up.
Who?
Benson and Taylor. They don't realize we still own the partner firm they're applying to. I stared. "They want a materials contract?" She nodded. "And here's the kicker. They listed Derek as their lead consultant." I exhaled a laugh through my nose. How poetic. "What do you want to do?" I smiled. "Send a reply." "From who?" "Me." The email was short. "Dear Mr. Taylor, thank you for your interest in CES Group's Partnership Extension Program. At this time, we are focusing exclusively on vendors with a record of ethical conduct and respectful corporate culture. Given prior experiences, we will not be proceeding. Sienna Cruz, CEO, CS Group." We CC'd the entire Benson executive team. Rosa sent it, then turned to me. "We should go out tonight." "Why?" "To celebrate the sound of doors closing behind toxic men." That night I danced. In heels I used to save for charity galas. In a dress I used to wear for Derek. For the first time, I danced for me. Julian joined us later. Watched from the bar for a while. Then came close, hands at my waist. "You're electric when you forget to shrink." I leaned in. "Then I'll never shrink again." Back home, alone in bed, I wrote in my journal. He mocked me for not having a job. But the job I held was the hardest one of all. Becoming the woman who didn't need to be validated to know her worth. I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and drifted to sleep in a house that no longer echoed with anyone else's ego. Just peace. Just mine. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's an email in a boardroom. Sometimes it's the sound of your name in a headline he never thought he'd read. Sometimes it's when the people who once laughed with him turn around and applaud you instead. That's what happened when the article dropped. The one that changed everything. It began with a woman named Simone. She was a journalist for a business lifestyle magazine. Smart, sharp, and unapologetically curious. She approached me at a leadership summit in Santa Barbara, where I was giving a keynote called "The Silent CEO: Why Women Build Empires in Whispered Tones." After the session, she asked to interview me for a feature. I hesitated. I'd kept the personal side of my story under wraps. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want Derek to think he still occupied that much space in my life. But Simone didn't want gossip. She wanted the architecture of power. How does a woman fire her husband and build a multi-million-dollar empire without breaking? She asked. I looked her in the eye. By deciding not to break was never up for discussion. The article was published 2 weeks later. Front page of the Modern Female Executive issue. Title: She Fired Her Husband and Then Rebuilt the Industry. Beneath it, a photo of me in a navy suit, arms folded, standing in front of the cruise tower downtown. The piece was clean, empowering, sharp without being petty. But one quote stood out. It was bold, intentional, and it started everything. The man I married mocked my ambition. The men he worked with laughed at me. What they didn't realize was I signed all their paychecks. Now I sign their termination letters. Within 48 hours, the article exploded. It was shared across LinkedIn, Twitter, Reddit, TikTok. Hashtag She Fired Her Husband started trending. Women posted selfies in office elevators with captions like, "Channeling my inner Sienna today." A bar in Austin offered a drink called the Termination. Whiskey, lemon, and a rim of salted tears. Even celebrities reposted the story. And in my inbox, hundreds of emails. From women thanking me. From interns telling me they finally spoke up. From wives saying they walked away. From daughters who showed their moms the article and said, "You can still start over." Derek? Oh, he saw it. I didn't have to ask. Because the moment it went viral, he tried calling. 4 times. Then 12. Then I received an email. "You made me a joke." I didn't respond. Because the punchline was never mine to carry. He made himself the joke. I just told the truth. What he didn't know, what no one outside my circle knew, was that the article was also a trap. A test. Because Simone's magazine had a new initiative, investing in women-led startups. And my company was launching CS Labs, a sub-brand focused on sustainable concrete alternatives. I let the article plant the seed. I let the public want more. And when the media buzz grew, investors flooded our inbox. CS Labs launched at full scale with $12 million in private backing in under 3 weeks. Derek's betrayal didn't just give me strength. It gave me leverage. Julian and I kept things quiet. But on the night of the launch, he pulled me aside, champagne in hand, smile soft. "This is your world now," he said. "And I'm honored just to orbit around it." I took the glass. Smirked. "You're not orbiting, Julian." I leaned in. "You're building beside me." He kissed me gently. Not like a man trying to possess, but a man in awe of a woman finally in her full power. It wasn't just romantic. It was revolutionary. The next week, I was invited to speak at an Ivy League business school. Not because I was someone's wife. Not because I had a famous last name. But because I had built something real and made sure it stood with the kind of strength that outlived gossip. In that lecture hall, I stood before 300 students and said, "They told me to be quiet." I became undeniable instead. They told me to stay soft. I sharpened myself with grace. They told me not to overreact. So I overperformed. One student asked, "What's the first thing a woman should do when someone doubts her?" I didn't hesitate. Say, "Thank you." Then prove them wrong in ways they can't undo. Later that month, Rosa threw a team party at the cruise rooftop. We celebrated a record quarter. But more than that, we celebrated culture. I stood in front of the team, raised a glass. "This isn't just about numbers," I said. "It's about dignity. The kind we give ourselves when no one else does." And then I smiled. And yes, I really did fire my husband. Laughter. Cheers. And beneath it all, peace. Because I wasn't bitter anymore. Just better. That night, Julian and I walked along the pier. The moon was bright. The breeze crisp. He looked at me like I was a secret he'd been gifted. I've never met a woman who made her pain so productive. I laughed. Pain is raw material. I just built something better with mine. They always come back. Not because they've changed, not because they've grown, but because the woman they buried sprouted into something so powerful, they can't stand being erased from her story. That's exactly what Derek did. It was a Wednesday, rainy, soft jazz playing through the speakers at my office. I had just wrapped up a strategy call when Rosa knocked, brows furrowed. "There's someone downstairs," she said. "Claims it's urgent. Client." She shook her head. "It's Derek." I didn't blink. "Tell him I'm busy." She nodded. "He said he won't leave until he speaks to you." I closed my laptop, let out a breath.
Fine.
I'll give him 5 minutes. In the lobby. Not because he deserved it, but because I did. He looked thinner. Not in the gym bro way he used to flex for Instagram, but in the way people look when life peels the comfort off their skin. Hair unkempt, shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. "Hi," he said, voice low. 5 minutes, I replied. He nodded, clutching a folder in one hand. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he started. "I just wanted to apologize." I didn't speak. "I messed up," he said, voice cracking. I thought you'd always be there. That no matter how I joked or dismissed you, you'd stay." He looked up. "And then you were gone. Not angry, just done." I stayed silent. He fumbled with the folder, then handed it to me. Inside, divorce closure documents. The final ones. Already signed. "I won't fight for anything," he said. "Not the house. Not the shares. Not even the car." "Why now?" I asked. "Because I finally realized," he whispered, "I never deserved you." For the first time, I looked him in the eye without resentment. Not because I forgave him, but because I was so far beyond the wound, I could stare at it and not flinch. "You didn't just mock me, Derek," I said. "You trained other people to do the same. Every time you laughed, you gave them permission to treat me like decoration." He nodded. "I know. And the hardest part," I continued, "was that I loved you through all of it." Tears welled in his eyes. "I'm sorry." I stood. "Thank you for signing. Please don't contact me again." He nodded.
Slowly.
Resigned. As I turned to leave, he said one last thing. "I tell people I used to be married to you. They all say the same thing." I paused. "What?" "They say, you must have been the dumbest man alive to lose her." I didn't respond, because silence, when chosen with power, is the sharpest goodbye. Later that night, I told Julian. He didn't tense, didn't get jealous, just listened. When I finished, he said, "Closure isn't something they give you. It's something you confirm you already had." A week later, I signed the final divorce papers with my own pen. That same night, I poured wine and opened the box of letters I'd written during the downfall. I reread every one, then lit a match. One by one, I watched them burn in my fireplace. The last to go was labeled, "The girl who loved him anyway." I whispered, "Thank you for trying," and let her go too. Julian took me away that weekend. Just the two of us. Big Sur. Waves crashing. Cliffside cabin. No tech. No timelines. Just stillness. And love that didn't ask me to disappear to keep its shape. We lay on the deck wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. He traced the back of my hand with his thumb. "You glow differently now," he murmured.
How?
"Like you know who you are." Some victories are loud. Champagne. Fireworks. Front page headlines. But the victories that change your soul? They're quiet. They arrive in the form of tears you didn't expect. Letters from strangers. A hug from a girl who says, "Because of you, I stayed." That's how I knew I'd won. Not against Derek, but for me. The Built by Her mentorship program was becoming a movement. Not a nonprofit. Not a vanity project. A force. We were training women for careers in project management, architecture, logistics, field ops. We offered scholarships, job placement, therapy stipends for those recovering from toxic work environments. We partnered with 3 major universities. Julian helped us design our first training facility, state-of-the-art, solar-powered, and named after my late father. the Antonio Cruz Institute for Women in Infrastructure. At the opening ceremony, I stood in front of the crowd, city officials, CEOs, mothers, students, and felt something I hadn't felt in years.
Whole.
A girl named Liana, 19, tall, nervous, walked up to me before the ribbon cutting. "I almost dropped out of college," she said. "My professor told me engineering was too intense for someone like me." I raised an eyebrow. "Someone like you? You know, too emotional. Too soft-spoken. I saw your speech online and thought, maybe I don't have to change who I am to build things." I held her hand. "You don't." She smiled through tears. "You're what I want to be someday." "No," I said softly. "You'll be better." Julian stood beside me during the ribbon cutting, hand at my lower back.
Proud.
Steady. And for a moment, as cameras clicked and cheers erupted, I thought, this is what being chosen by the right man feels like. Not possession, not projection, just presence. A man who doesn't shrink beside my spotlight. A man who never calls my strength too much. That night, after the celebration, we returned to the home I'd redesigned myself. Same walls. New light. I poured wine, kicked off my shoes, and played Etta James on vinyl. Julian pulled me into a slow dance in the kitchen. "You're glowing again," he whispered. I pressed my forehead against his. "I'm not glowing," I said. "I'm finally home." 2 days later, I got a call from Rosa. "You've been nominated." "For what?" "The Women in Industry Lifetime Impact Award." I laughed. "Isn't that for people nearing retirement?" "They changed the requirements. You're the youngest nominee in history." I paused, then said something I hadn't said aloud in years. "I think I'm proud of me." That weekend, I visited my mom. We sat on her porch, tea in hand, wrapped in soft blankets. She looked at me for a long moment. "I used to worry about you," she said.
Why?
"You loved so hard, trusted too much. I thought the world might eat you alive." I smiled. "It tried."
She leaned in.
"But you fed it your fire instead." Later, as I walked through my childhood room, I found an old journal tucked beneath a box of shoes. I opened it. The handwriting was younger, smoother, hopeful. I want to be a woman who walks into a room and is heard without raising her voice. I laughed, not because it was naive, but because I'd become exactly that, and so much more. On Monday, Rosa called again. We just landed a national contract. FEMA. Disaster Response Build-Outs. You'll be on site in DC next month. My eyes widened. Do they know who they're working with? "Oh, they know," she said. "They asked for you specifically." I hung up, stared out the window, and whispered, "I hope Derek's watching." Not to gloat, but so he knows that everything he laughed at became legendary. Julian and I drove to the beach that evening. We parked, took off our shoes, let the tide kiss our ankles. "You ever miss the quiet?" he asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But the quiet I miss is the one inside me, not the silence I was forced into." He nodded. "Do you think you'll ever fully forgive him?" I thought about it.
No.
But I'll never forget what he taught me. Julian raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "That I never needed to be less of myself for a man to love me. I just needed a man who could." Later that night, I opened my journal and wrote, "I'm not a phoenix. I didn't rise from ashes. I burned the house down myself and built a fortress on the same soil." The thing about healing is that it doesn't look like a finish line. It looks like waking up without flinching. It looks like hearing your own name and smiling instead of shrinking. It looks like realizing the version of you that was once overlooked was never broken, just quietly preparing to rise. And when I finally stood on that stage to accept the award, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. The Women in Industry ceremony was held in a glass auditorium overlooking the bay. The sky that night was lavender. The crowd, full of leaders, women in steel-toed boots and tailored suits, architects with hard hats tucked beneath their chairs, young girls clutching notebooks with hope in their eyes. When they called my name, I didn't feel the imposter syndrome I used to carry like perfume. I felt rooted. Like every scar had built me a spine made of oak. Julian squeezed my hand as I stood. Rosa winked from the front row. And I walked forward, head high, heels clicking like punctuation marks on a sentence I wrote myself. I took the podium. The room went silent. And then I spoke. Not like the woman who once let a man define her worth, but like the woman who built her own. When I was 29, I married a man who said he loved me.
He did.
But only the version who stayed quiet. The version who dressed pretty and smiled politely and never outshined his spotlight. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I was never just a housewife. I was a house being built. Foundation.
Brick.
Reinforcement. And when he mocked me for not having a job, he forgot one thing. I owned the building. And everyone in it. There was a pause. Then the room erupted into applause. I didn't cry. Not then. That came later, quietly alone, back in the hotel room with my shoes off and my makeup smudged and Julian's arms around me. But that moment on stage? It was pure. After the ceremony, a man approached me. Older. Gray suit. Polished smile. "I knew your father," he said. "I remember you," I replied. "You've made him proud." I looked him in the eye. I didn't just carry his legacy. I multiplied it. He smiled. And for the first time, I realized I no longer needed approval from men in polished shoes. Because I was the one writing contracts now. I was the one choosing whose names got remembered. That fall, I gave a TED Talk. It was titled, "What Happens When the Quiet Woman Stops Shrinking?" It reached 5 million views in 3 weeks. I didn't talk about Derek by name. I didn't have to. I talked about all the women who go unseen while holding entire systems together. And I ended it with this. They told me I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too loud, too ambitious. But all I was too powerful for their comfort. 1 year later, I walked into a bookstore in Portland. There on the table was a display, built by her, stories of women who rebuilt themselves from the ashes. A compilation. My name on the cover. Beside it, a girl stood holding the book. She looked maybe 20. Nervous. Eyes scanning the pages like they held a map. I smiled. She didn't recognize me. Until the cashier said, "That's her, you know." The girl turned. Froze. Then whispered, "You saved me." I shook my head, gently. "No, darling. You saved you. I just built a road." Back home, Julian asked me what I wanted next. Another venture? A vacation? A sabbatical? I looked around our home. Books on the shelves. Art I loved. Warmth everywhere. And I said, right now, I just want to enjoy a life I no longer have to recover from. He pulled me in. You earned it. Sometimes I still think of Derek. Not with anger. With clarity. He was a mirror. Not of who I was, but of who I refused to be ever again. And in that sense, maybe he served his purpose. He tried to reduce me, but all he did was reveal me. The final letter I ever wrote to him, though I never sent it, sits in a drawer in my office. It says, "Thank you
For underestimating me.
for mocking me, for walking away from the very woman you prayed for, because your absence created space for a life that finally fits, and a love that never asks me to shrink. I am not the girl he married. I am the woman he never thought I'd become. And the next time someone laughs at me, I won't fire them. I'll build a world so far above them. They'll need wings just to whisper my name."